So, as we said before, so tips on how to write a literature review. Get a template in your field, very important. Start writing as soon as possible. Don't leave it until when you are in your third year. Don't leave it until when you have finished collecting your data. So start writing as soon as possible. Select and cite only relevant materials, as we said. One of the reasons why you need to start writing, it doesn't matter if things have moved on. It's easier for you to modify what you have written than for you to start without having anything at all. So group the material into categories and comment upon the most important features. So it's the most important features that relate to your research question that you need to comment on. So there's no point talking about the fact that this study was carried out in England and was not in sub-Saharan Africa if culture or geographical variations don't matter. And if they don't matter in relation to my study, then if I'm making such points, then I'll be getting out of point. Does that make sense? So make sure, make sure that you comment on important features in relation to your research or to your PhD. Be careful and do not just describe, because there is a tendency that I've got 80,000 words. How on earth am I going to be able to write 80,000 words? That's usually one of the things that challenges that most PhD students will have. But I can assure you, by the time you start writing, you write 120,000. So your first draft is likely to be about 100 or 110, because by that time you have so much idea. You want to do so many things within the data that you've got. And then there is that tendency for you to be descriptive, because the more you write, the more descriptive it's going to be. So, but try as much as possible for your not to make your literature review descriptive. Make sure that, as I said, be critical, not just being descriptive. One of the things that being critical will help you to do, helps you to identify strengths and weaknesses in the materials reviewed, compare the results of different authors, evaluate theories, and so on within the body of knowledge that you have looked at. So if you have done that critical review, as I said before, it will help you in your discussion. So it's just like you are saving time, really. So do not be overcritical of somebody else's work. Be politically correct. Remember, there's no piece of work that is perfect. Your PhD is not going to be perfect. If we look at perfection, there's no paper that will be published. There's no PhD that is going to pass, including mine. Okay, so keep it simple and clear. Simple. Make sure it's as simple as possible. Avoid using a long word or long sentences. And with due respect, this is, I have the opportunity to supervise international students, and one of the things or the challenges I've seen is that most international students, what they want to do is they will write long sentences, they write long words. Here you are doing your PhD, you are not, most people here that will read your PhD, they understand English, so you are not here to impress anybody about English. What you are here to do is to make sure you write in a concise way that people will understand. So if it's maybe a 12-year-old that can read, if they pick this thesis, will they understand what you have written? If it's an old man or woman, 80 years old, if they pick your thesis, if they read it without having knowledge in your field, will they understand what you have written? And very, very important, one of the ways is to have short sentences, short paragraphs. One of the things I know, qualitative researchers, you are allowed to say something like I, me, my. In particular, when you are doing your reflexivity, when you are doing your reflexivity, you can do things like that. But in quantitative research, you cannot use first person. You cannot say I, me, my. So you need to write in third person. Yeah. For example, you could, rather than say I feel or I think, so you need to put it in a different context to say it could be considered that, or it may imply, or it implies, or it suggests. Does that make sense? So that's the way you need to write your thesis. So quantitative, but as I said, qualitative, you might be allowed to say something like I, me, my. Okay, you'll be able to get away with that. But quantitative, you're not likely to get away with that. Where appropriate, use quotations to illustrate a point. Yeah, in particular when you are quoting from people's work. Make it interesting and enjoyable. As I said before, you are writing for someone. And the person you are writing for, or people, the people you are writing for, they are your examiners. If you annoy them, then they're going to give you a hard time. And one of the ways you can annoy them is not writing a good piece of work or literature review. So don't annoy them. So make it enjoyable. 400, my pages, I think 400 and something pages is a lot of work. But the first time I examined PhD, it took me weeks to be able to read this, because it's very unlikely for you to have 1 week without doing anything and just be reading PhD. I'll be bored, to be honest. So it took me about 3-4 weeks, and that's why when you submit your PhD, you have 10 weeks before you go for Viva to allow time for your examiners to read your thesis. So if it's not interesting and enjoyable, then I'll be frustrated as I'm going through, and then I'm going to be picking on things that are not necessary, but I'll be able to justify. But in addition to describing a literature, you need to interpret. So make sure that you interpret what the literature says. Make sure you need to apply to a context in terms of your research question. Evaluate and come up with your conclusions. So based on this, it is possible that these findings are not applicable, or it is possible that these findings might not be relevant to this context, as this study was carried out in adults and not in children. Considering the fact that children are most commonly affected by this condition, therefore, there is a need for us to also examine whether this intervention will work for children with this condition. So you have applied and you have evaluated and applied that to your research question. Revise your work. Check for grammar, punctuations, spellings. Remember, you don't want to annoy your examiners. What some people recommend is, don't quote me, that after your PhD, once your supervisors are happy, send it to a proofreader that will help you to proofread. You can get, I don't know how much to do it, but send it, they will proofread, and then they send it back to you, and then you work on their feedback and they submit. They're just looking at English. They are not looking at the structure. Well, looking at the structure, but they're not looking at the content rather. So they don't know, because some of them, they won't have any idea about what you are writing about, but at least if it flows, they will know. So they can give you feedback, because at times when you are too close to it, there's that tendency that so many things, you're so familiar with it, so you think it's right, whereas it's not. But if you allow somebody else to read it, then they can give you feedback. Okay? So writing, just like anything, just like driving, or writing with your pen or typing, they are skills. And for you to develop your skills, what do you need to do? You need to practice. You're like football. If you don't practice, they don't just carry you to go and play for Manchester United. So you need to keep practice, and that's why it's important for you to start writing as early as possible. And that's why you don't leave it until when you have finished your data collection before you start writing. So you need to keep practicing. So I'm bringing it to a close now. So remember that your literature review should highlight or contain the following, because these are the three things that I will be looking for in your literature review. All the things that we've been saying since 3 o'clock or past 3, if you don't remember them, just remember this. So your literature review should show to me what is it that is known in this area, what is it that is not known in this area, and what is it that you are going to do or that you have done, because it depends on how you are writing it. Are you clear about that? So what is known, and when I supervising PhD students, when I tell them, when they are writing their RD1 or they are writing their PhD, there are three things that I want to see in your background or your literature review. What is known, what is not known, what are you going to do? Because that once your literature review can answer these three, can fulfill these three requirements, you are done. That's your literature review. Okay? Any questions?